In 1988, deep in the Alps, a 12-year-old kid had been playing chess for 10 hours straight. 10 hours in, his focus was slipping, and then, exhausted, he made one tiny mistake. He gave up his queen and resigned, thinking he'd lost, except the game was actually a mathematical draw. The boy was Demis Hassabis, and the loss made him physically sick, not just because he lost the game, but because it triggered a much bigger thought. Inside that hall were hundreds of some of the smartest people on the planet, spending hours using their brain to play chess. And Hassabis started wondering, what if you could somehow connect all those minds? Could they cure cancer, map the universe, solve problems that no single human could ever figure out alone? That idea would stay with him for decades. 2 decades later, Hassabis and a small team of neuroscientists and engineers in London decided to chase that idea. They started a company called DeepMind. The goal wasn't to build a calculator or another search engine. They wanted something much bigger. A machine that could actually learn, reason, and think. In other words, artificial general intelligence. But there was one problem. If you wanted to build a mind, you need somewhere to train it. They started with video games, because games are basically perfect little worlds. They have clear rules, clear objectives, and one thing AI loves, a score. In 2014, DeepMind gave an AI an old Atari game called Breakout. They didn't explain the rules, they didn't tell it what battle was, what the ball was, or even what it was supposed to do. They just gave it raw pixels on a screen and one instruction: get the highest score possible. At first, it had no idea what it was doing. It just kept trying, failing, and trying again. But after hours of trial and error, something strange happened. The AI figured out a strategy no one had programmed into it. Instead of just bouncing the ball back and forth, it learned to tunnel through the side of the wall, sending the ball behind the blocks and letting it tear through them from above. Nobody told it to do this, it figured it out on its own. For a moment, it looked like something bigger was happening, when mastering an arcade game was still just that, mastering an arcade game. If DeepMind wanted to prove it was building something resembling real intelligence, it needed a much harder challenge, a game where brute force calculation wasn't enough. Then came Go, an ancient Chinese board game that is so insanely complex the number of possible positions is greater than the number of atoms in the observable universe. Unlike chess, Go isn't just about calculating moves, it demands intuition, pattern recognition, instinct. For decades, researchers thought that this was the game AI simply couldn't crack. It was basically the holy grail of artificial intelligence. Then, in 2016, DeepMind put that idea to the ultimate test. Its AI, AlphaGo, went up against Lee Sedol, one of the greatest Go players on the planet. In Game 2, AlphaGo played a move that made the entire room freeze. Move 37. It placed a black stone on the right side of the board. The commentators thought it was a mistake. Some experts called it terrible, but AlphaGo had calculated that a human player had almost no chance of ever making that move. It wasn't a glitch, it was something much stranger. The AI had found a strategy that humans had overlooked for nearly 3,000 years, a strategy that looked completely alien to the people watching it. And suddenly, the question wasn't whether AI could play Go, it was whether AI could see the game in a way humans had never. A year later, AlphaGo faced Kiji, the world's top-ranked Go player, and AlphaGo won. The reaction was immediate. The world took notice. This felt like the Sputnik moment of the 21st century. For the first time, a machine wasn't just copying human intelligence, it was producing ideas humans hadn't thought of themselves. But Go had one major advantage. It was clean. Both players could see the entire board. Nothing was hidden. There was no traffic, no noise, no unexpected events. The real world wasn't going to be that polite. So DeepMind moved on to StarCraft II. This was a completely different beast, a real-time strategy game where players had to make hundreds of decisions, manage multiple things at once, and operate with the most battlefield hidden from view. DeepMind built a new AI called Alpha Star, and for a while it looked unstoppable. Then a human found a weakness. Alpha Star had been trained with access to an almost perfect stream of information about the battlefield. But when DeepMind restricted it to something closer to what a human player could actually see, a professional player found a way to exploit it. He kept distracting the AI at the edge of its vision again and again and again. The machine couldn't manage its attention. It panicked, its carefully optimized strategy started falling apart. The human won. And that loss revealed something important. For all its processing power, AI could still be incredibly fragile. Give it the wrong situation, and intelligence could suddenly look a lot like confusion. But DeepMind was never really trying to win video games. The games were just the training ground. The real target was something much bigger: biology. For decades, scientists had been stuck on one of biology's biggest problems: protein folding. Proteins are tiny molecular machines that keep our body running, and what they do depends heavily on one thing: their shape. A protein starts as a long chain of amino acids, then folds itself into an incredibly complex three-dimensional structure. If you could predict that structure, you could understand diseases, design new drugs, potentially unlock entirely new ways of treating them. The problem was that there are almost impossibly many ways the protein could fold. In 2018, DeepMind entered a global protein folding competition. They won. But there was a catch. Their predictions were impressive, but they still weren't accurate enough to completely transform how scientists worked. So, DeepMind went back to the drawing board. They rebuilt the system from the ground up, and in 2020 they unveiled AlphaFold 2. The results were extraordinary. It wasn't just another improvement. AlphaFold had crossed a threshold scientists had spent decades trying to reach. It could predict protein structures with astonishing accuracy. A problem that had consumed generations of researchers suddenly looked dramatically more solvable. And DeepMind didn't keep the breakthrough locked behind a paywall. They released the technology and through the AlphaFold database made hundreds of millions of predicted protein structures available to researchers around the world. The idea that started with a 12-year-old boy wondering what human intelligence could accomplish had now reached biology, and it didn't stop there. In 2014, DeepMind introduced AlphaFold 3, pushing beyond individual protein structures to model how proteins interact with DNA, RNA, and drug-like molecules. That same year, Demis Hassabis and John Jumper were awarded the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for their work on protein structure prediction. The boy who had once stared at a chessboard for 10 exhausting hours had spent the next few decades chasing the question that began in that room: what happens when intelligence itself becomes a tool? But biology wasn't the finish line. DeepMind's technology was now being applied to problems far beyond games and proteins, from predicting weather to controlling robots. And suddenly, the idea of artificial general intelligence didn't feel quite as fictional as it once had. We weren't standing at the finish line, we were standing at the beginning of something much bigger. And that creates a problem that has nothing to do with chess, or Go, or protein folding, because building intelligence takes an absurd amount of computing power. DeepMind eventually became a part of Google's massive technological infrastructure, giving it access to the data centers and hardware needed. The little research lab chasing an almost impossible idea had become part of one of the most powerful technology companies on earth. And now the race for advanced AI isn't just a scientific competition, it's a geopolitical one. Billions of dollars, entire nations, the biggest technology companies on the planet. Everyone wants to build the most powerful machine first. But there's a deeper problem hiding underneath all of this. AI doesn't exist in a vacuum. We're teaching these systems our data, our decisions, our language, our history, and our values. Which means, whether we like it or not, we're putting a little bit of ourselves into the machines that we're building. For decades, we taught AI how to play our games: chess, Go, StarCraft. We gave it the rules and asked it to win. Now, we're approaching the point where the machine may be capable of doing something much more consequential, making decisions in the real world. And that leaves us with one final question. What happens when the machine stops playing by our rules and starts making its own?